Good day, everybody. And thank you for joining the NASTD IT 101 series. My name is Brad Steele, and I'm the Senior Director of Unified Communications for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and an NASTD past president. NASTD is the National Association of State Technology Directors, and we're made up of technology professionals serving state government. It is a member-driven organization whose purpose is to advance and promote the effective use of information technology and services to improve the operation of state government. Article 1 of the NASTD Constitution, Section 2, Purposes and Goals, lists its second goal as engage in programs for the training, education, and development of technology professionals from all areas of state government. While president a couple of years ago, we decided to put together a set of educational videos, IT 101 sessions, to help with this education. We ask industry leaders 10 standard questions about a technology or service that we need to know more about. And if you haven't seen the videos we put together in the past, you can go to the NASTD website, nastd.org, and you will find a link to our YouTube channel where you can find all the videos that we have done. So this week's topic, we are going to be talking about utilizing the NIST 800-207 standard for Zero Trust Architecture Framework. This is used to help mitigate organizational risk. And our SME for this topic is Paul Martini from IBOS. Paul Martini holds over 230 patents in cloud cybersecurity and is a trusted expert on zero trust, a modern cybersecurity architecture designed to prevent ransomware, breaches, and data loss by making all applications private. Paul has been recognized for his leadership and innovation, receiving the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award and being named one of Goldman Sachs' 100 Most Intriguing Entrepreneurs. Paul has also been published in many scientific journals, including the Journal of Foundations in Computer Science and the Journal of Analytical Biochemistry. Paul is co-founder, CEO, and co-chair of IBOS, a leading zero trust cloud security company which protects organizations globally from breaches and data loss. Paul is very big into sports cars, including his favorite, a Ferrari 488. Which he promises he's going to take us all for a drive the next time NASTD has an event in Miami. So Paul, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brad. Good to be here.
Of course, the price of gas would have to go down, but we won't talk about that here. Yeah. All right, so we're talking about NIST 800-207. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and why it's important to us?
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for having me, Brad. So basically, I actually think the concept is pretty simple. I know the term zero trust is used quite a bit, just everywhere, a lot of vendors and in a lot of different ways. But the way NIST describes it in their zero trust architecture publication, which is referred to as the 800-207. Is that zero trust is really about resource access. And I think that this is really important because what they're really describing in the 800-207 is really a way to reduce risk, cyber risk, by solving for the root cause of breaches. CISA put out a report actually just recently, and what they did is they studied all of the ransomware breaches in 2021. They did a joint report with not just the US, it was Australia and the United Kingdom as well. And what they found is the root cause of the top 3 initial infection vectors for ransomware and breaches was unauthorized access. Those three reasons were phishing, which many of us know about, but credential theft, as well as vulnerabilities. And you can see at any given day, CISA is putting out, in some cases, 95 or more vulnerabilities per day. Meaning software is, it has a bug in the software that allows an attacker to get in without authentication, for example. And so the zero trust architecture of 800-207 realizes this, and it's actually the reason why you see those executive orders that just came out in January that's mandating the agencies to move to a zero trust design. The executive order, by the way, references the 802.07 5 to 10 times or more within the executive order. But really what they said is, if you can control access to the front door of applications and data as well as services, you really can prevent the root cause of the breach to begin with. So, if your software becomes vulnerable, but an attacker in Russia, China, or anywhere else can actually get to that software, it's basically private and inaccessible, then you've pretty much mitigated the risk. You still want to patch the software, but it doesn't become a fire drill. And they do show a very simplified version of zero trust, which, again, they call it resource access, not, very importantly, not network access, because you're not really, the idea is not to access the network, traditionally like a VPN. The idea is that ultimately a user wants access to some application, data, or service. They don't really care about the network itself, so they shouldn't actually be connecting to the network to begin with. And so they should be granted access to just the applications they need. And by doing that, you basically can eliminate the concept of east-west traffic, someone getting into the network and jumping from application to application, or being infected with ransomware, and then basically getting all of the servers and the systems infected. And their term for zero trust, I mean, some may have heard of the term ZTNA, zero trust network access, but they actually refer to this as zero trust access, and they drop the word network out of the phrase. And I think this is important because you're not really talking about, again, accessing a network. You're talking about accessing a resource. So zero trust access is a more appropriate term. And then lastly, and as we dig in deeper, what I would say is this isn't about cloud resources or on-prem resource. It's really about any resource. So if you have a server, a shared drive, if you have Office 365, if you have data sitting in both, in a hybrid of both, really the idea is to put a checkpoint. They use an airport analogy. Put an airport security checkpoint in front of those applications, all of them, and then allow the service, a zero trust service, to determine whether someone crosses the checkpoint to gain access to the application or they get denied before they even get to the front door. And you're doing this for each and every request. And I think as we go through this, one of the things that we'll double click on is a lot of misinterpretations, nuances that can be challenging. For example, the NIST 802.07 calls for authorization and authentication for every single interaction. So every time data is exchanged, you have to both authenticate and authorize that request, not just at login. And I think those key concepts become really important, especially as you correlate it to the top 3 initial infection vectors. For example, credential theft happens after there is no login. They stole your credentials. A vulnerable software doesn't actually prompt you for a login because it's vulnerable. It's allowing an unauthenticated actor through. So if you don't actually follow these little nuances that they have within the 802.07, you could end up with a false sense of security because you're missing the key point, which is literally put a checkpoint in front of your resources, typically a service, and then allow that service to make authorization decisions and authentication decisions every single time data is exchanged between a user and a protected resource.
Excellent. All right. So how would states use NIST 800-207, and why is it important to us?
Yeah, so personally, I love zero trust. I love what NIST did with 800-207 because it's not about technology and it's not about fluff. It's about a conceptual design model that can be applied to massively reduce risk in a measurable way. And they have a 59-page document in that 800-207 with the details of how you would deploy it, how you would migrate to a solution that supports that. But it doesn't actually call out any particular technology because zero trust is about people, process, and technology. And so the idea is that you're going to hopefully have some technology help your people follow a very consistent process, right, of categorizing what you have and you want to protect, as well as implementing controls around those protected resources. There's a supplemental guide that came out on about 10 days ago. It was on May 6th. And it's basically, I would call it a workbook. It's a white paper from NIST. And this is a planning guide, which actually also double clicks on these nuances that we'll talk about. But I think that when I look at a situation today and why I see so many breaches, is that most organizations have so many applications and so many resources, so many employees that are leveraging their own applications because they're so easy to consume. And so the surface area of what you're protecting is just spread everywhere. And with government and state government as well, there's still a lot that's on-prem within a data center, and it'll be there for a long time. Transportation systems and things of that nature. But following this process of 800-207 and implementing technology around that, what this allows you to do is follow the risk management framework from NIST, which starts with first categorize your resources, understand what it is you're protecting. This is why the airport analogy is so important. So if you look at the airport analogy that they give in the NIST in the publication, they say if your job was to protect an airplane from a terrorism attack, there's lots of different ways you could go about it. So, Brad, if you were assigned this role, you could one approach you could take is trying to figure out who of the 8 billion people might be a terrorist. That's going to be really challenging. Where do you start? Anybody can be a terrorist. Doesn't matter where you live, who you are, right? Or you could invert the solution. I like inverted solutions because sometimes it makes the solving this problem a lot easier, which is there's only 500 people that are going to board this plane. So why do I really care about the 8 billion people? I only care about 500 of them. And so what you do is you put a checkpoint in front of that airplane, and you reject everyone by default, and only allow authorized and approved users to cross the checkpoint after you've checked their ID and after you've checked their luggage. So as state governments, one thing that I think that is actually very valuable is not only does it allow you to categorize the resources, understand what's high impact, moderate impact, and low impact. Start with the high impact first, gate them. So you put a checkpoint in front of them. You can produce reports for all of the stakeholders, every C-level, so that they can understand that our journey is going to start with the high impact resources first, then we're going to go to moderate, then we're going to go low. We're going to start by making these private by putting them behind a service, but we're also going to classify all the information so we know we don't wake up one morning to a fire drill. And then finally, with regulation coming from, and I'm already seeing this already, but once the federal government goes down these paths to mandate federal agencies, they start to trickle down into compliance. So by implementing these types of controls from NIST, what you're doing is you're preparing yourself for something that's going to come inevitably, because ultimately you do need to understand what resources you have, their impact levels. This has been around for a very long time, as well as there's nothing better than to put a gate in front of all of your resources, because Russia and China, they shouldn't be touching those resources to begin with. I mean, unless you have contractors there, and it's a known transaction, you should only allow just the state employees that need access. Think of a camera system. How many people really are going to need access to the admin console of a camera system? Maybe a handful. So it's much easier to say, we'll use the inverted approach that there should be only 5 people that have access and everyone else will be denied. So it's a really great way to reduce risk. And I think the investment reward, is just, the ROI is just so high.
All right. So in thinking about what you've been describing here, all I can think of is, and you're using an airport analogy, but I'm thinking of a hotel analogy. If I were to use a firewall to protect it, it would just basically lock the front doors of the hotel. But unfortunately, there's places in the hotel where you want the public to be able to go. So what do? You open the lobby of the hotel up, but you put those locks on the doors to the pool, to the gym, to the rooms in the hotel. So now you're protecting those assets, but still allowing the traffic to flow through the rest of the hotel. So maybe we have too much traveling on our hands. I don't know.
We're too excited for travel, right? Yeah, definitely. But that's a great I think that's a great analogy. I think it's an excellent analogy. But one of the things that I also, when we think about these problems, these aren't new concepts, right? If you think about it, you've always put a firewall around sensitive servers. The problem, what we're actually saying is those servers no longer are just in your data center. You have applications in the cloud, you have data in the cloud. So how do you achieve, with virtual LANs, VLANs, you're trying to isolate networks and keep only these trusted networks. So really, zero trust from a technical perspective is taking VLANs and putting them on steroids. So you're basically pushing a VLAN to the extreme so that every single resource, every single application is in its own VLAN. And you're only letting certain users into that VLAN, but you're doing this in software. So this SaaS ability, when it's delivered in a unified way, allows for these, the NIST talks about this, for example, with what they call the enclave model, that allows you to move these policy enforcement points into physical form in your data center to protect resources, yet they're connected to the global SaaS service that sits in front of all the cloud applications, all the same policy, same visibility, and it's transactionally allowing requests through for each and every single request.
Cool. All right, so as I'm thinking about implementing this in the state and starting down the road, what will this replace within my current infrastructure, or what does it supplement?
Yeah, this is what's great about what I like about the NIST Zero Trust is that you basically are taking budget from legacy approaches. So it may cost you a lot less actually to do this the right way, but you're not going to replace the legacy technology with a replacement of the same. You're going to actually naturally get more security by the nature of the concepts of zero trust while eliminating the budget from these other areas. For example, VPNs can be very expensive, especially with remote work. You have employees sitting everywhere. They may be sent home. They may be coming back into the office, but you're not going to replace a VPN with a modern equivalent of a VPN because you're not going to allow a user to connect to your network. They'll never connect to a network in that way. What ends up happening with zero trust is it connects the user to the application, which sits in the network, but they only have a connection to that application. There's no east-west traffic, no scanning the network. Your risk is also mitigated, but also to an employee using a zero trust service, everything appears to be on the public internet, but they don't realize that behind the scenes, based off their identity, the zero trust service is actually transactionally giving them access to these different resources, some of them being in the data center, some being in the office, some being in the cloud, but it's fully transparent because the location of those resources actually are irrelevant. And think about the transformation, cloud transformations, where you have a data center that might be moving or going away. You can shuffle those applications from your data center to the cloud, and the end user never knows about it because to them, it was just an application that always existed. So think about the simplicity, even to the IT staff, which can shuffle things around from cloud to on-prem, from on-prem to the cloud, and not impact the end users because they're just naturally connected to those applications to begin with. So you take the budget from the VPN, you take the budget from the proxies. If you're doing any sort of malware, CASB, DLP, they call it SSE types of functions, why buy a proxy appliance that only works within the data center, within the office, when you can have the same service that's globally available? It both connects the users, replacing the budget from the VPN, as well as replaces all the security functions of this proxy and firewall. So in essence, you have the SaaS equivalent of proxy, firewall, VPN budget that's kind of consolidated into a global cloud security service. Actually, Neil McDonald at Gartner coined the phrase that he actually came up with the term SASE. And basically, with Joe Scarupa, basically the title of the paper was "The Future of Secure Network Securities in the Cloud." And so it's the same security. It's just the Netflix equivalent of that security, but it doesn't mean that it needs to protect cloud applications. It protects all applications. They could be 100% all on-prem. They could be in the cloud, but most likely it's hybrid. It's a combination of applications that sit everywhere. But I like the flexibility it gives IT teams because they're not worried about if you've run enough cable and enough, deployed enough equipment and moved enough equipment, you want to get to the fun stuff. What are the security policies? Everyone's limited with labor. Let's spend time classifying resources, understanding where our data is, doing those kind of things versus racking and stacking gear. So the job becomes more more impactful because you're not wasting the time on things you've done 100 times over.
Okay. So you've basically touched on my next question, which is, is this designed to protect cloud or premise-based? And it sounds like the answer is both. Are there any differences, depending on if your data sits in a public cloud or if it's in a on-premise data center? Are there any differences?
There should be no difference. And actually, I think this is also one of the first tenet of the 800. They have tenets that they laid out for 800-207 of zero trust. The very first one is basically a resource is a resource is a resource. Don't forget that. Whether it's cloud, a function, an actuator, storage, like you really need to think of a resource as just something someone wants access to that you want to protect. You want to protect it from data loss, data destruction, and you want to make sure it's available to the employees from a denial of service where they crypto lock your data and ask you for ransom, right, to unlock that data. So you have these same security objectives. They're defined in FIPS 199. They define those three security objectives. But I think that a resource is a resource. It really doesn't matter, again, if you're 100% on-prem, or 100% in the cloud. And also, ZTNA is not a VPN replacement. It eliminates the budget from a VPN, but a lot of people think I need a ZTNA solution to replace my VPN. Because remember, you're connecting users to just resources, wherever they sit. But you're never connecting a user to a network. There is a term being used quite a bit, which is single packet authorization, called SPA. And I think that when you think about the supplement that the NIST put out, it's called the Cybersecurity White Paper 20. It's the planning guide. They actually double clicked and said there's a lot of the term session is nebulous. It's interpreted a million different ways. So let us be clear on what we mean by that. It's the single connection with a single identity and a single authorization, all the way down to an API request. A read or a write should be completely independent. And then they double click on this tenet when they talk about data flows in that supplement, the planning guide. They have tenets for data flows, and they say, let's be clear that you need to authenticate and authorize every single request. So if you're reading from a database and then writing from a database, authentication occurs and authorization occurs on that second transaction as well. And so one of the things that can be missed is that fact alone. Many believe, for example, that if you implement an identity provider, let's say Okta or Azure AD, that you've implemented zero trust. But think about that. The only transaction that occurs with that resource for just the authentication piece, when you're using a model like that, is it's 0.01% of the transactions. It's just the login part. After they've logged in, they're now placed and interacting with this resource freely. Forget a delete and a get or a fetch. It's free reign on this application. And guess what? CryptoLocker works after they've logged in, or maybe through a vulnerability. So you're not preventing CryptoLockers, ransomware, or these other breaches. So that's why they're being very particular with per transaction authorization. And ideally, having this unified service or unified edge, what that means is that it treats every resource the same, on-prem or cloud. So I'm not a big fan of these concepts, and there are lots of different vendors use different terms, but of a concept of private access and internet access and having services like that, because you're already, by just having that concept, you're already treating resources differently. So if you're going through this private access, it must be, and you actually find that there's differences in security when you do things like that. So I believe that truly needs to be one service edge that abstracts the resource. Doesn't matter whether it's on-prem, you get the same device posture checks, you get the same CASB, DLP, filtering, security transactions, authentication for every single request. And truly that gets applied to every single resource, no matter where it sits. So that's a big thing. I mentioned the single packet authorization. The issue I have with that is authorization shouldn't occur at the very beginning either. So you're using a single packet to gain authorization to a service, but you need authorization on every single request. So you shouldn't open a port number, we see these SPAs open up a port and then you can interact with the port. If you're dealing with ports, you're missing the point. Because a port, for example, Apache web servers running on 443 can run 20 websites, 20 API services on the same port, on the same IP address. You actually need to differentiate every single endpoint. And one user having access to one website doesn't mean they have access to a different website on that same port, right? And so this is why, anchor yourself on the resource first. And then anything related to network should be abstracted. Although this is about, I come from a networking background as well. It does have its connectivity and security, and sort of the blend of those two things in a SaaS-based form.
So I'm going to go back to my hotel analogy. So what you're saying is, it's like giving somebody a card key, but it opens up 10 different doors in the hotel, not just their own.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, in the case in this particular case, it might be the difference between a private hotel room and a room that's shared between, there's could be other things. So you actually need to give them access to just their bed, just that section, right? But yeah, absolutely. Like you don't want to give access to the floor, right? The 23rd floor. You want to give them access just to that room, right? That's going to give them the right appropriate level of access.
And depending on who the person is, you want to lock that mini bar.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
So I will be sharing just so you know, at the end of the presentation, I will have up the URLs for both the NIST 800-207 and the cybersecurity white paper that Paul is talking about. So I'll have those at the end of the presentation so that folks can do a little more research. So if I'm looking at that that white paper in particular, what are some of the changes that have happened in this space over the last couple of years, and what's in that white paper?
Yeah, think about this. 2 years ago, before COVID, the world was so we couldn't even imagine the world we live in today, right? Because now the way people work, people think that this core issue was driven by the fact that people went remote, but it's actually a two-sided problem. People went remote, but your applications went remote too. Because if they were actually in your data center and they stayed there, you really actually have a firewall around them. There is no access, which is actually why they were more secure. But as these applications moved to the cloud, because of the fact that people were remote, they needed access as well. You have a situation where you have applications everywhere and you have people everywhere, and that combination is a really bad combination because your surface area is everywhere. So basically, doing the same types of strategies you've used for connectivity and security, but doing them in a SaaS-based way, enables you to allow everybody to work from home, allow everybody to work 1 day a week at the office, full-time in the office, shut down, move applications from one place to another, doesn't really matter. You know that security is naturally baked in to the connection. I use Zero Trust. I'm actually traveling right now, and my laptop is, every single packet that leaves my laptop is fully encrypted with TLS. That includes DNS. So as I'm on this hotel room, they can't even see the DNS queries coming out of my laptop. They're going to a Zero Trust service, and that service is then looking at what I'm trying to resolve and resolving it on my behalf. So I almost think it's almost like a global VPN in a sense, but not really, because it's not connecting you to an office. But it's as if you're always, whether you're going to the internet or you're going to these protected resources, you're always securely connected. And by the way, one of the executive order and the mandates in the memorandum was encrypted DNS. So you can actually, just by the nature of, let's say, 15 seconds, you put an agent on the server, on the system, you've just checked the box for that compliance. Even if the software doesn't support it, it doesn't matter, because the software will send a plain text DNS query. We automatically pick that up, encrypt it with DOH, encrypted DNS, and send that out to the service. So it makes these things a lot easier without you having to worry about, like, how are we going to meet these particular requirements, and how are we thinking about people connected on highly untrusted networks that are compromised.
All right. Next couple of questions I'm going to tie together here. So if we're thinking about moving forward with this, what do we need to know to get started, and how long should we plan for implementation?
Yeah, it's a journey. So you're never actually done with Zero Trust, right? It's an ongoing journey. It's part of the risk management framework. I would say it starts with, the processes start with categorizing your data, labeling your information, implementing controls. In particular, you're going to implement Zero Trust controls from 800 to 207. The document describes this process in detail, including deployment guides. We at iBoss, we're the technology that actually implements all of the core concepts of the 800 to 207. So what I like about that is, as you read these concepts, you're not jumping through hoops to figure out how you organize people and processes. For example, we do things like allow you to label resources. So we have a central repository of all your resources. We have an asset database, so you know exactly which devices you have. We have a user database, right? And we start enriching this information, but it allows all the people and processes to work around the same goals. And then as you categorize your resources, you can see now what's high impact, low impact, moderate impact. I would say, to get to a real basic form, it depends on how large of an organization you are. We've seen implementation same day because it's SaaS. But I think having a few weeks to a month would be good for lots of organizations. But you can, because it is a journey, the benefits you're going to get in the beginning as well are so high, because you're going from, even if it's just, let's say you just grab your 3 most critical resources and you protect those, imagine how much risk you've reduced. It's like anything in life. In the beginning, you're going to get these big swaths of benefits. As you get to the long tail, then there's going to be like the low impact and low, and that could take a long time. But again, the reward is so high, even if you just did 1 application, 2 applications, 3 applications, even if you just connected your users so that all of their data is encrypted and connected, and give them a better end user experience as well.
All right. So in continuing on with the planning, how do I plan for a cost model for this going forward? What do I need to take into consideration, and how do we pay for getting NIST compliant?
Yeah, it's like Zoom or anything else, or email. The nice thing is it is SaaS. It's per user, so you basically pay per user. It includes all of the core capabilities. At least for iBoss, we include the core capabilities to implement Zero Trust with your people and your processes. We form the base technology and platform. And basically, what I would look at from a savings perspective, whatever you're spending on VPN, I would look at whatever's being spent on proxy that could pay for this and actually save a ton of money, not just in labor, but in actual real costs, hardware costs, and things of that nature. But basically, just count the number of users, and pick up. We have 3 packages. You pick a package. They're all zero. Core is the foundation of zero trust. Advanced gives you deeper, like if you were in an airport analogy, that lets you check deeper into the bags for malware and CASB. And then our complete includes data loss prevention, deeper data loss prevention. So, you could start even with a core, and then you work your way through advanced later. But basically just the number of users, and it's just that simple.
And I think you would probably have to figure in also how much you're going to save by not having a breach if you implement things correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of vendors like to use that. You're going to save $1 billion if you, but it is real. There is real cost there, right? So what I like is it enables the end user, to have a better experience. They're no longer having to turn on that VPN every single time. They're just connected all the time. Their data is always encrypted, no matter where they go. So it's as if they were on the private network all the time. They don't have to be physically in your office. You can produce reports to the C-levels that say, these were the assets we had, these are the high impact ones, and these are the ones we've actually made private, and we're going to keep working our way through. So you can show measurable results. And also, I think I like to sleep at night. And one of the things is, there's nothing worse than not knowing what would be the impact of some unknown application that we have if that were to get breached. I wake up one morning, now it's a fire drill. And this is why the state agencies and others are getting into trouble, because they've never even done an impact analysis on all of these things. I've heard some responses sometimes like, we have so much stuff, it'll be impossible we can't possibly classify all our stuff. Think about what we're really saying. Would you rather be blind? I mean, that's basically like saying, I just want to play Russian roulette, and I just so much stuff because there's no way I could ever classify where the bullets are in the gun, right? So I think realistically here, no matter what you do, even if it's a spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, classifying your resources is by far, with impact levels, the most important things. I like using technology for that because it's digital. It does a classification for me, right? It has a lot of applications in there. It helps different people and different administrators work in the same console together and things like that, as well as it provides all the security functions and the connectivity functions. So, I think this is definitely a journey that everyone will go through. The perimeter is eroded. There is no perimeter. The new perimeter is the application itself, the resource itself. It starts and ends there. The laptop itself, that's the asset. And then with things like browser isolation, you might have contractors that need to connect to systems. Instead of doing virtual desktop, VDI with a pane of glass, use browser isolation, which is tied to a service edge, because that'll put a pane of glass in a browser. You don't have to manage the virtual infrastructure. It's the SaaS delivered equivalent, but you get the visibility, the logging, the security, and the connectivity all baked in as well. So it's a long, that's one thing that I didn't mention, but things like virtual desktop VDI, very expensive, a lot of hardware to maintain, takes up a lot of data center space, a lot of power. That all can go away as well.
Nice. All right. This is normally where I ask what security concerns do we need to have? Now, this is obviously a security idea. So when we're talking about security in general, is there anything else we need to know when we're going through this process?
With relation to this type of technology or the resources?
With this type of technology.
Okay. Yeah, I would probably say that this is a foundational technology. So this isn't a feature that you're buying. It's going to be the foundation of where you tie in your threat feeds, your analytics, your device management systems, your logging, right? So if you don't get the nuances of the 802.11, right? For example, you do it with 2 service edges. One doesn't inspect data, one inspects data. You can't change that later. I mean, the work, it's so embedded that you actually increased your risk, but it's like almost permanent risk or long-term risk, because the work to get it out is not going to be just swapping your antivirus provider or something like that, right? So I think that pay attention to those nuances, because if you do that part right, then everything you're going to build on top of this, APIs, automation, onboarding employees, offboarding employees, dealing with lost devices where you just want to cut them off resources. There's so many things that you'll be able to build from a long-term strategy that's where you're going to get the amplified value, the long-term value and savings. All of us have situations where a laptop gets stolen and it may still be logged into systems, or an employee gets offboarded, but yet they're still logged into Jira or Confluence, right? Those kind of things, right? So being able to say, look, they're offboard, cut them off on all the access instantaneously, that's all really big benefits. But pay attention to those nuances. They're critical. The tenants are good. The folks that wrote that NIST 800-207, it's a free asset provided by the government. Don't take that for granted. I mean, if you had to pay for that type of intellectual property, it would be very, very expensive. Just think Deloitte and others. So just take advantage of those concepts and pay attention to those nuances.
All right. It's always my final question. What did I forget to ask you? What else do I need to know?
Now, I think, look, we covered a lot here. I would say if anyone ever brings up the word zero trust, for us, it's about NIST, it's about 800-207. Anchoring on a common definition is good for our industry. And it's as simple as resource access. That's what they say. They simplify that phrase in the paper. So zero trust is about resource access, protecting resources by controlling access through authentication and authorization. But that actually will ground you as you look at different products. For example, okay, how does this product tie into resource access, right? Whether it's a device management system or authentication, right? I think that ultimately is key.
Okay. All right. Well, I once again, I'll say it. I hope everybody else can get as much out of this as I did, because I knew very little about this subject coming in. I'm not a security person in my central focus. Obviously, I have lots of security concerns. And so I've learned a lot, and I thank you very much. I hope everybody else gets as much out of this as I did. So once again, folks, this is Paul Martini from iBoss, and he has been very gracious to share his time with us. If folks have any ideas for future IT 101 series, they can reach out to me, Brad Steele, at brad.steele@mass.gov. And again, at the end of this, I will be putting the link into the NIST 800-207 Zero Trust Architecture document, and also for the new planning guide, the CSWP 20. So that will be right after we're done here. So thank you all again, and I look forward to seeing you all. If this gets out in time, I look forward to seeing you all in Philadelphia. And either way, registration is now open for the annual event in Seattle in August. So please go onto the NIST website and register. Paul, thank you again for your time. This was extremely informative.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was great being here.
Thank you.